All right, sorry about that. That was a lot of effort for these few second videos. In my current art practice, I've started using the surviving doll makers that I could find online. In addition to the images that I had still had lying around on an old hard drive that I had made when I was a little kid. And I'm interested in pushing this sense of navigating around the doll maker's inherent limitations to the point of pushing against their intended purposes. Sort of making these fantastic images of surreal floating heads and not really connecting the parts in the way that you're intended to, but sort of being more a little bit of that. And so a lot of the composite creatures I end up making with them, I call them girly monsters. They're sort of this idea of a creature that appears girly, with all these signifiers that these avatar makers present, but of course, going against any notion of, biological femininity being a real thing. So they are these sort of monsters created in a pixelated digital space, but also merging with flesh and using cutouts of my own body and sort of lending my own body to this, the Barbie, white girl ideal of these early 2000s doll makers. And also positioning myself between that and also the anime girl. So sort of build an identity that is in spite of these oppressive images that have also really shaped how I view the world and myself. And sort of looking for this boundless expressive potential against very restrictive conventions. And ultimately, just utilizing imagery and colors and whatnot that I find very intimately familiar. So without getting too much into the theoretical, just briefly go over two of the main ideas I'm very interested in is, for one thing, how a lot of the fandom surrounding Japanese anime in particular, but this could also easily, I think, be extended to a lot of other media, cartoons and whatnot that are produced in a Western context. And there's certainly now so much cross-influence between those spheres anyway. There's this theory that a lot of these characters are sort of consumed out of the database and composited of parts that, for example, the website Toonami allows you to search by different database parts. For example, pink hair or cat ears, and then it'll produce different images, fan art, etc. of all these pre-existing characters that meet this criteria. And it can be argued that any character that is produced in anime now is ultimately composited of these pre-existing parts that are always referencing some pre-existing character out there. And so, in that sense, the distinction between the original and the copy starts to break down. And I think the same kind of logic could also be applied to, for example, the pixel avatar makers, character creators. Even though there is, for all those images, there was a pixel artist out there creating them, there's also been so much tracing and reiterating and sort of loss of the original source that at this point, the makers, like the one on the left, that I'm still able to access. Actually, this website, Secret Dolls, it went off the web, after I started making these, and now it's hosted somewhere else. So they're always kind of precarious, but all the parts on there are obviously made by a wide variety of artists, and so they're just sort of copies and parts without origin. And I combine that with the other notion that when one looks at a cartoon face, due to the simplification of the face and the expression, you aren't inclined to read it as looking at another person because you don't have that, I'm looking at another like image. Instead, you are more likely to identify it as yourself. And so that's where emojis and whatnot, and like little chat stickers and GIFs and all of that it's led to this new medium of expressing yourself and your feelings, your reactions through a simplified face. Yeah, and so, going back to sort of using this sort of collage, monstrous composite image approach, I'm interested in how I can scramble these hyper-feminine signifiers to ultimately express my own sense of gender fluidity, my own gender fuckery, and accessing the parts of my identity that feel non-human, that feel partially virtual, cartoon or tied to fictional characters, parts that are animal. All of that is invoked. And I hope to speak to the broader experience of sort of this like a cyborg self that is experienced by so many, especially trans people, in an expansive amount of ways. And that, every time the database expands, every time there's characters created, the same parts are being reiterated, people out there are always self-identifying themselves with these characters, and sometimes it has like a very formative role in how people learn to process and express their own sense of gender and sexuality and identity. And I'd say the techniques I'm interested in, I place in this legacy of photo montage that will go all the way back to the German Dadaist artist Hannah Hoch, who, using photo montage, created these hybrid creatures where she would merge the parts of men with woman, human with animal, and mass media images of the idealized white European beauty. With images from, because she was living in Nazi Germany, there was all this imagery of, degenerate art and, degenerate like bodies of colonized people and cultural artifacts. And so in doing so, as a queer Jewish woman, she was aligning herself with the other and trying to visually counter the racial purity propaganda of fascist Germany. And I would say, ultimately, these expressions were only at the expense of the people of color who were used in them, only because they didn't have a voice or subjective presence in the imagery that she was accessing. All of these were clipped out of catalogs of, sort of exotifying anthropological images of, other racialized bodies or what, degenerate art was. So in these examples, they can only ever really signify the monster or the other or the degenerate. So I say for me, continuing that legacy of photo montage, but also kind of pushing beyond it, since the parts are not all evenly photographic or even three-dimensional in origin. So here's just some other examples of paintings where I would create bodies from cut out parts of sex toys, sort of using that to imagine infinite possible configurations of genitalia, fantastic images of sexual and gender expression that as in real life, can be sort of brought out materially through technology and, you know, these like silicone toys and all these things. So circle back to, you know, traditional approaches to anatomical study and observation. Ultimately, it's necessary to observe and study different bodies, and that is also wholly informed by the bodies and images of bodies that the artist has access to. And so thinking of how that's sort of a limitation that our society presents us, you know, for example, thinking of how in high school a lot of the ways I tried to study like photograph bodies was looking at like fashion magazines, and how that was, even at the time, it felt like you were studying like not even a real person, because those images are so doctored and so constructed. Like this sketch was the one time I was able to take a figure drawing class in my undergrad. It was like a special privilege to be able to have all these different models with different body types. But that was like very one, you know, even that was one unique experience that, you know, is not as easily accessed now out of that. It's also something that incentivizes other work that I'm doing. For example, currently working on a queer porn coloring book based on the photo archive of Courtney Treble. So even when going back to depicting, you know, material bodies, going back, you know, not being in the realm of the fantasy, I still want to reiterate the importance of having a safe presence of and access to a variety of bodies to express in art, particularly fat, non-white, trans, and disabled bodies. And the importance of these figure drawing spaces, photography, pornography, etc. So this is a project where I'm interested in taking this anatomical figure drawing like training, or taking that approach back to its most classically trained approach, but again also emphasizing a diversity of bodies based off of beautiful images that are out there. Also think about how, you know, for anatomical studies, they say like, you know, your own body is the easiest and first reference image to access. But maybe not everyone's even comfortable starting with their own body, and I think that's a okay thing too, and which is why ultimately the avatar, with its sort of open access to fantasy elements, can also be a just as expressive substitute approach. And it's an approach that can always be ended up merged with the real, so you can always, you know, depict bodies that exist, but you can go beyond that. So just some final examples. So I've been really obsessed lately with this app game called Monster Girl Maker, which again, you know, it has a great intention, I think, as just being a basis for creating a character or a self or whatever you want, and then something that you can, you know, keep interpreting yourself. So this is a monster girl that I have been working on based on one that I made in the character creator. So that's an app game that's popular now. The artist behind it is School Kiss on Instagram. For a while, I was really addicted to this game called Line Play. It's like part of the Line Messenger app, where you make like little avatars, and it's like a big chat, and you can decorate your house and all this stuff. One thing I liked about it is that when you start to create your avatar, that you can select your gender as male, female, or animal. And so I like being able to be the animal gender in this game. I'm the bunny and my girlfriend's the koala. We both play the game together, and then drew our characters, us as our characters together. And there's like infinite possibilities of games and character creators that people can use nowadays to sort of create their own anatomical references. So going from the very simple and pixelated to, now video game technology you can really customize bodies and characters to, have all sorts of shapes and sizes and beyond that, and make them fantastical. This is my alien character of mine in The Sims 4. It's very interesting to see how these games are like learning to navigate around the option of gender. Obviously, originally they would all be something very simple like, are you a boy or a girl? The beginning of Pokemon, but Sims 4, it's kind of interesting how you pick a character's overall like gender category, but then there's also you can pick male or female for things like physical frame or clothing style preference, whether or not they can get pregnant, whether they pee standing up or not, and all these things. And you can pick male or female. There's still a binary to navigate, but the fact that you can sort of recombine them, it shows all these great, very like freeing opportunities that the game. It's not something that's central, like the game is